Afternoon. Welcome to our Mondays with EFTI.Talk. The Erika Friedenheim Tourism Institute and the Department of Tourism, Hospitality, and Event Management in the College of Health and Human Performance at the University of Florida is presenting to you EFTI.Talk, as a leading voice for the future of tourism and hospitality in Florida and the United States. The Erika Friedenheim Tourism Institute is the home of a series of webinars discussing trends impacting the industry with top experts. In today's EFTI talk, Chipotle Chief Corporate Affairs and Food Safety Officer, Laurie Schalow, joins Brand USA President and CEO, Christopher Thompson, to share perspective on visitor and consumer insights as it relates to strategic marketing, branding, and communication with consumers. It is my great honor to introduce our moderator, Mike Reid, who is the Dean of the College of Health and Human Performance at the University of Florida. Dean Reid is recognized for his visionary leadership and research. Mike has maintained an unbroken record of NIH funding for over a quarter century and has published over 130 scientific articles. He has directed training programs supported by the National Institutes of Health and has mentored the research of over 100 junior scientists. Mike currently serves as the co-chairman of our development committee within our EFTI's Industry Advisory Board. Dean Reid, thank you so much for your leadership. The stage is yours.
Dr. Fu, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you for organizing this talk today, which I'm very much looking forward to. It is my pleasure to continue the conversation about our two honored guests today. Laurie Schalow has got a long history of work in the hospitality industry. From 1994, I believe, you first began your career in Taco Bell and went on then to storied brands like KFC. She served as the vice president for public affairs for the conglomerate of Yum brands before she was recruited away in 2017. Where she currently is the Chief Corporate Affairs and Food Safety Officer for Chipotle Mexican Grill, overseeing a wide portfolio of activities in over 2,600 outlets. Laurie, we're delighted to have an executive with your experience and your knowledge to be with us today.
Thank you, happy to be here.
We're also joined by Chris Thompson, as Rachel mentioned. Chris is the president and CEO of Brand USA. This is our nation's public-private partnership dedicated to increasing international visits to the United States through marketing and promotional efforts, which have a major impact on the US economy, on jobs in the United States, and really on the international perception of the United States around the world. Chris also is a member of our advisory board for the Erika Friedenheim Tourism Institute. And we're delighted to have you with us today, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Glad to be here.
Of course. So there's a lot going on in these industries, travel, tourism, hospitality. Given the dynamics of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic disruption that's followed that, I think that hospitality and travel have really been at the pointy end of the spear in this regard. They've taken some big hits. It's been really hard over the last year, but there's some evidence of hope in the coming months. The vaccine is starting to roll out. Incidence rates in North America are starting to slowly decline. Prognostication says that by this summer, maybe the fall, we're going to begin returning to a more normal life. And no aspect of the US industry is more excited about that, I'm sure, than hospitality, travel, and tourism. So I would very much like to hear from each of you what you think about the major factors that will contribute to the return of customers to hospitality and travel industry, and how you think this recovery is likely to shake out in the coming months. Perhaps, Laurie, we could start with you from your perspective.
Sure. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would say, I mean, vaccination certainly has to be in the forefront of any sense of returning to normalcy. And, I'm glad that we're well on our way. In fact, in the hospitality industry, in a lot of places, restaurant employees are deemed as Class 1C, so behind the essential workers and the elderly. And in fact, just last week, New York City opened up the opportunity for employees to be vaccinated. So we started seeing our employees vaccinated over the weekend, which is just really great to see. But I think in terms of general population traveling, through, airports and in hotels and dining in restaurants with comfort, in addition to the vaccines, it's going to be, what steps are these brands and these companies taking, being very transparent around that. So, early days was wellness checks for all the employees and making sure people aren't working when they're sick. But I think as we get beyond that, those, the early assurance, I think consumers will continue to look for and want to see confidence that if they want to take a trip, they want to stay overnight somewhere, they want to dine at a restaurant indoors, that they have that assurance that they're going to be safe and protected. So I think that that's going to be critical. And like I said, in order for us to get back to large gatherings and things like that.
Yeah. Chris, from your perspective, you see things, pardon the phrase, but in a more global perspective, you have sort of a higher altitude view on this. What are the issues you see from your perspective at Brand USA?
Well, I'd have to say, coming off of last year, which is obviously one of the toughest years we've ever had to deal with, and going into the new year, as it relates to the pandemic, there was optimism as it relates to the vaccines. And then right when we have some progression, then we have a little regression when we start hearing about the new strains in UK and Africa. So it is a little bit of a roller coaster ride. It has been the entire time. And unfortunately, we're all so dependent on things outside of our control, the way our country's set up and the way the administrations have chose to deal with it. You have 50 states and 400 cities all figuring out how to deal with it. And it is truly a local issue. I've been saying all along, this isn't a demand issue. Laurie's restaurants are no less appealing. Our destination as a whole and what defines it, both through experiences and geography, is no less aspirational. It's really all tied to the pandemic and the inability for people to travel. So Laurie mentioned it, it's really a confidence issue. It's a consumer confidence issue. And until, as it relates to us being totally international, until our international guests can first see us getting on top of the pandemic and creating a healthy and safe environment here in the US. And of course, 24/7 news cycle makes that really difficult because they're watching it in real time, in real life. And so until they can see that the experience they want to have here, whether it's dining as it relates to Laurie or anything else related to why they would come here, until they feel like it can be delivered in a healthy and safe way, they're not going to come. So I think that's obviously is the one issue that goes without saying. We got to get on top of the health and the safety around it. Unfortunately, international is going to be the last to return. I think one of the things that has really been interesting is the profile of the hospitality industry has never been more significant, never been higher, all due to terrible reasons, which is the fact that when you look at the effect on the pandemic has had on our economy and particularly jobs, over 50% of the hospitality jobs have been lost. It represents 35% of all jobs lost. And so I think it has, if there is a silver lining among a lot of terrible things that have occurred, I think the profile of the industry is higher, because what defines, in our case, what we attract people to come see is really what makes up is the fabric of our hometowns and the cities we choose to live in and the reasons why we stay where we are. And so I think in that way, everybody that has anything to do with defining that has been impacted significantly. And I think therefore the whole idea of hospitality community, which has a big umbrella, has achieved a high profile. But I think there is optimism. I was saying in a couple times that I've been on video here recently, last year was hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think we can see it now. It might be still flickering, but it is a little brighter. but it's still uncertain, really uncertain. And there's still a whole lot of uncertainty out there.
Yeah, you touched on some really important things there, Chris. One of the things that you mentioned, which I think has really been hard for everyone, is that there's relatively little we can do in many regards. We don't have the power to really control this pandemic except on a very personal level. But the federal government is marshaling its forces. There's a third stimulus package that's being considered. And as you said, the hospitality and travel industry has really been prominently featured in this economic downturn. So what aspects of the stimulus package that's being discussed in Washington might be beneficial to international travel in particular, and to our industry in the United States?
So certainly as these stimulus packages have come along, the very first priority is to do everything that the federal government can do to support getting on top of the pandemic with all the safety protocols and all the health protocols. Then they really needed to reach out to all the businesses that are disproportionately within the hospitality industry that have been negatively impacted by this. I'm talking large businesses down to the mom and pop businesses, and certainly the PPP funds, the other grant funds that were available did that, and those are still very much needed. And as I talked about in the industry, how 50% of the hospitality jobs have been lost, and they represent 35% of all the jobs lost. We have colleagues. Laurie has colleagues. I have colleagues throughout this industry that are either furloughed or have been laid off, and certainly they need to be taken care of because this was no fault of their own. Those are some big challenges and some big asks. And in the times that we're in, it seems like the government is willing to do that, but then you have the politics, and of course that'll work its way out as it always does. We'd like that to look probably a little prettier than it is looking right now, but I think in the end they'll pass another bill. And in our space, in the DMO space, we're our nation's DMO, so we promote the country around the world. But some of the people that have been hurt the most are our local destination marketing organizations, and up until the last stimulus bill, they weren't really included in the PPP funds. And in many ways, they represent the face of the local communities and represent institutions like Laurie has all over the country. And so those things have been addressed, and I think they're hitting on all the hot buttons that they need to be hitting on. And I think there's a keen awareness at the federal level, in Congress, cross parties, cross chambers, that there needs to be something done. So I think there's some bipartisan support for all that. It's just figuring out what does it look like when it gets through the political process.
But before we come to Laurie's perspective on this, because I know from a corporate perspective, it's going to be very interesting. I did want to ask you a sort of a related question. Is it too early to think about the federal policies around travel restrictions and international travel? You figure it's going to be a few months before that starts to shake out?
Yeah, unfortunately, we've even seen some regression there. I mean, Canada seems to be buckling down even harder now, with the new strain in the UK, with the way, when the vaccines were first being brought out, the US and the UK were first on top of that. They approved them as quick as they could, and the next day they were distributing them. The rest of Europe has been a little bit of a mess. All the rest of the countries across Europe delayed in approving it and have had varying levels of getting the vaccine out. So unfortunately, they're going to be facing a supply issue, and they're going to be a little bit behind in the recovery side of things. So the borders is a big issue, but that all then gets back to the whole idea of the health and the safety concerns to start with, and how do you protect that and guarantee that? I don't guess there's any guarantees. The thing you said, it's the most important when you open the conversation overall and even into this second phase, is we all have to take our personal responsibility and do what we should do. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they said that at least up to a third of people that even are vaccinated and therefore should be immune to some levels of the virus are still going to be carrying it. So if they don't continue to do their personal responsibilities of masking and social distancing, then there's the whole issue of spreading it without realizing it. So lots of things going on as it relates to that. The borders, that's a tricky thing because there's so much going on there, and there's so many considerations that have to be taken into that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Laurie, let's come back to you. Talk to us some about how this federal stimulus package is going to affect your corporation and sort of the restaurant industry as a whole and hospitality industry. I know you sit on national boards that think about this from a broader perspective. What's the conversation sound like at your end?
Yeah, I think, first what Chris said, I do serve on the National Restaurant Association board, and we just issued the industry, and a recap of the industry, I guess, a look back last week. And to the point about the jobs lost, 110,000 restaurants here in the United States have closed, and many of those will remain closed. And that's devastating, right? You think about the mom and pops, your favorite restaurants that you go to frequently, they just couldn't survive, right? And so I think that those who were able to quickly pivot to a digital, a delivery business, have drive-throughs, have done very well. But there's so many restaurants out there who won't make it. And that's unfortunate. And I think from a stimulus perspective, first from a consumer perspective, I think the stimulus checks that have gone out to the general public, those are helpful, right? We see little shots in the arm when those go out that people do take advantage to go visit their local restaurants. So that's very helpful, and hopefully those will continue. And then the PPP that's been offered to corporations and to businesses to help them stay afloat, again, critically important. So, Chipotle did not take advantage of that. We didn't need to, which is good. A good thing. We could leave that for those who truly needed it. But that has been, we know that that's what's keeping some chains still open. So that's critically important. There's so much to unpack. Chris, as you were talking about travel, we have a COVID task force that we still meet 3 days a week, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings. And we were talking this morning about travel. We've had restricted travel just even among our corporate staff and visiting suppliers and restaurants. And, when can they start to move about again? And what does it mean if they've been vaccinated? And, are vaccines going to be required in certain places and for, travel and even for restaurant workers? So, there's a lot to consider, but I think that PPP, liability protection, there's going to be a lot of things that are critical this year. Like Chris, we do see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's not all doom and gloom. We believe that come late spring and summer, there will be more people ready to get out and about and feel more comfortable doing so. And that will be a nice boost, I think, for, certainly for the restaurant industry and for, I think, just travel and tourism in general.
Yeah, you touched on some really great points in that answer, Laurie. Thank you. One of the issues that comes to my mind, and in part it was triggered a little bit by the wonderful Chipotle commercial last night at the Super Bowl. That was really terrific. Makes me want a burrito.
Great, it worked.
Yeah. So right now, you and Chris have both touched on the importance of keeping people safe, and that what we can do during this pandemic is to reinforce personal responsibility, which includes not sitting and dining in restaurants sometimes. And so on the one hand, there's this public health imperative, but on the other hand, down the road, as things start to open up, and I know that your corporations and your colleagues in the industry are anxious to get back to business as usual. How do you manage that marketing challenge? That marketing is a major issue in your job, Laurie, and you have to think about this very much, I can imagine, in a nuanced way as you sort of evolve your marketing over the next 6 to 8 months. How do you think about that?
Yeah, our marketing team has just been amazing, right? And I think, the terms we use to describe them are flexible, scrappy, nimble. We had to quickly pivot to focus on the digital part of the business as consumers were no longer, following their old routines of being at the office and then grabbing lunch and sitting in dining rooms. We had to let them know we had several different access points. And I think that's what you're hearing from a lot of brands, drive-through, takeout, delivery, curbside pickup, whatever it might be. So I think pivoting our messaging to tailor to the consumer to give them, the confidence that they can have a no contactless, meal choice, but also, pivoting to talk about our safety messages, which is something typically marketers don't like to do, right? They want to promote the product and the great ingredients. And, we did like our Super Bowl ad, want to talk about our food with integrity and how important it is to understand what's behind what you're eating and where, products, and ingredients are grown and raised, and that's important to the impact on society. But quickly having to pivot all of that and make sure that you're targeting different messages. Everyone went into free delivery mode early on, which was very important to get people to try those new channels. We saw people like never before sign up for our rewards program, sign up to use the app. So we've really changed, again, one silver lining of COVID is we've transformed the digital space in the restaurant industry light years ahead. It would have taken years to get to this point. You know, we quickly saw our digital business go from 20% to 70% overnight, and we've still maintained around 50%. So 50% of all consumers are still ordering it digitally and either having it delivered or going to pick it up and take it out. So I think just pivoting your messaging, talking about, again, transparency, health, and safety, but also how can consumers safely and have a good experience with your product.
So you raised an issue there that that we're wrestling with in academia. So much of our education has gone online, and we look at next year and we say, well, what's it going to be like next year and the year after? To what extent is this a permanent change? Do you think about that at Chipotle? Do you think about the balance between in restaurant dining versus digital customers in the future?
Absolutely. And that's why I say with optimism, right, that we're looking forward to the spring and summer, that we call it stickiness. So we do think that, you know, a lot of this digital business will stick with us. And that consumers are also going to be very anxious to get out and dine with friends and family and just sit at a table and enjoy a meal, you know, with others that they haven't been able to see. So we think that there will be a surge coming, which is great welcome news for the restaurant industry, for people to get out and about, in addition to keeping some of these behaviors that they've learned over the last year.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that. I'm fascinated by the approach your team is taking. Chris, it seems like to me, y'all's problem is so different. I mean, you've got customers who cannot come and take advantage of your product, but I bet you're still marketing to them during this time, and I can't imagine what you're telling them. And then at what point are you going to change? You know, what are the triggers to start changing that message and encouraging people to come back?
So yeah, you're right. Our business is very different than Laurie's. We don't produce a widget or a product or, you know, have a storefront. We're a marketing organization, and in the DMO space, we always talk about being 3 or 4 times removed from the delivery of the experience on the ground. So our convention and visitors bureaus at the local level are once removed, right on top of the experience, and in some ways can help shape that. Then you have the state level DMOs, then you have the regional DMOs, and then there's us layered in on top of that. So we've always been top of the funnel, demand driven, trying to influence intent to travel. Well, right now, nobody from our major markets can travel to the United States. And so talking about having to make a pivot, when this thing hit and we realized that it wasn't short term, it was going to be around for a while, we had to scale ourselves back to, we're calling it a state of readiness. We scaled our activities and our operations back to between 85-90% of what they usually are. And even our funding source got cut off. We're funded by visitors that come from visa waiver countries, and they every 2 years sign up to participate in that program, and they pay a fee that we get a portion of to get to match with private funds, and that's how we're funded. So our funding source got totally cut off. So we're in our state of readiness. We have really good reserves, so we're in decent shape. But there's so many things outside of our control, all health and safety related, that we just have to wait for that to take care of itself. We do think there will be a time when the borders are open, you know, when we've gotten our act together here at home to where we're out and about and enjoying the country, and we can then be in a situation to invite the world to come back. But our messaging will be very different. I think, first of all, the critical part of our messaging is, and Laurie touched on this, to prove that we're ready. You know, hopefully they'll see it on the 24/7 news cycle, but our messaging needs to also reinforce that. And then to welcome them back. There's been lots of things going on, things tied to the pandemic, geopolitical things and otherwise, that maybe have not sent the most welcoming messages in the past. So we just need to, as my CMO says, I love simple statements. He said, remind the world why they love the United States, and remind them why they want to come back, and remind them that every bit of that is still here. Nothing's changed, and it's ready for them. And then we're going to have to try to do the best we can, because the critical part of that, with the international being probably the last thing coming back, we're not thinking that's probably coming back, at least early hints of it, till the end of the calendar year and probably on into the next year. We're going to have to really start focusing on those bring to life those possibilities, and then try as much as we can to entice and convert down the funnel, to help our partners and push the business to our partners on the ground so that they can get some benefit and some relief from international visitors as quick as we can help them get there. That's not really been as much of our calling in the past as far as pushing them down the funnel, but we're trying to, in this time where we're scaled back, reinvent and figure out how do we get there? How do we push them down there?
Yeah. I think you've alluded to this, but I'd like to ask you more explicitly. Do you think there's pent up demand? Do you think that there's a big potential for the return of international tourists immediately, or do you think it's going to take a while to coax the international visitors back to North America?
No, absolutely. There's pent up demand. You and I were talking about it before we got on this session. We're all waiting to be able to get out and about and go on trips and do the things that we normally do. So not only is there pent up demand, but our consumer sentiment research that we have in 11 major markets around the world suggests that all the planning cycles are going to be constricted too. So, where you would have a normal pattern that might be 2 to 3 to 6 months out, depending on the market and the travel patterns, I think they're locked and loaded, ready to go. They've already, our marketing has been less about pushing it out to them and more about the content that we've created that's short, medium, and long form content that lives on our website, lives on our Go USA TV channel, we've been developing and aggregating for the last 10 years. They've been looking at that, and they look at other places. So while they're sheltered in place and doing whatever they're doing that's other than what they want to be doing, they're travel dreaming. So I guarantee you there's pent up demand for both domestic travel and for international travel. And I think there's going to be constricted planning cycles. I don't think you're going to see an explosion once the people can start traveling.
Well, speaking for the state of Florida, we hope that's true. We're ready for that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So I love this conversation about international travel and the economics of it and the marketing related to it. One of the things that I was curious about as I looked at the expertise and the portfolios that the two of you oversee is the news that's constantly coming in from the Wall Street Journal, from the Times, from British newspapers, and European sources about the impact of the pandemic on the European economy, and the dual hit that is imposed by Brexit finally taking effect this fall. So I'm sure that companies in North America in general, and both of you in particular, will be looking at this closely and thinking, is there some sort of advantage to this? Do these changes, does this disruption provide little opportunities for American business that we can take advantage of, or that can be somehow to the benefit of the folks on this side of the pond as we watch our neighbors in Europe? Laurie, I know that Chipotle has a number of outlets in not only in Canada, but in Britain. How do you think about that?
Yeah, we do. We have about 25 restaurants in Canada and just about a dozen in Europe. And so we're not a big global business, but we do plan on growing and developing in specifically those markets. And so something we're looking at, but, like you mentioned, Europe has been hit very hard, Canada the same, from COVID. And so, Chris mentioned it. I think one of our biggest challenges has been managing the local ordinances, right? And, not only local health department, but then you can even get down to zip code with having differences and challenges. And so trying to manage that part of the business has been very difficult. And so then you take it overseas, it's even more complex. And with Brexit, depending on what will happen as we think about our growth, but it takes years to plan in a market, development wise and finding locations and that. So it's, this year will probably be a little bit of a down year for that, but then hopefully in 22, we can get more active there.
Well, will the changes in international laws and taxation among countries affect your supply chain for your Chipotle outlets in Britain? Are you at risk of losing access to the European market?
It can. I don't think we're at risk, no, but we do have a very robust global supply chain. And, from our sourcing, we have certain, we call it food with integrity standards. And so, no antibiotics or hormones and things like that. So There are very limited supply, and so that's something that we are always challenged with, but we have an incredible head of supply chain in the team who, works constantly to make sure that we have, enough supply, enough diverse supply, so that we hopefully won't have any outages. But you're right, it's always a possibility and something we have to be very cautious of.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Chris, what's your take on this?
So I mentioned it a little earlier, but I think this is a great example of a direct impact of Brexit, and it relates to the vaccine. So the U.S. and the U.K. were right on top of it. As soon as it was approved, we were dispersing it the very next day. The European Union, the rest of Europe, did not approve it right away, and they've been slow to actually administer it, and it's causing some supply problems in getting the vaccine to the European Union, as was promised by the companies that have the vaccines. So I was listening to a Wall Street Journal podcast the other day. They said, well, so what does that mean to the rest of the world? Well, if you're a trading partner with the European Union, they're going to be challenged to be able to, and they even called out travel, probably less travel from that area, just because they're not going to get on top of the pandemic as quick as they would have if it was pre-Brexit, when they were all singing off the same song sheet. So UK is our third origin market as far as volume. About half of our 80 million visitors a year come from Canada and Mexico. And the number one long haul market is UK, and probably the majority of the top 10 includes the rest of the Europe. So that's a critically important part of our return to any semblance of what we looked like in 2019 before the pandemic. And so any challenges that they're going to have with being able to travel to the United States, any challenges that we have tied to that, tied to borders being open or otherwise, the new strain, we mentioned that came up in the UK, that's now complicating things. And again, there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, the whole regression thing, and it introduces more and more uncertainty. So there's Brexit. I would say that there's probably a great example of how Brexit in this situation probably did not serve that continent very well as it relates to their dealing with the pandemic.
Yep. So it's interesting. It's clear that your firm has a major focus on international communication and marketing and relationships. But at the same time, a moment ago in your previous answer, you talked about how the pandemic has really stimulated you, and Brand USA at least, to interact more with local DMOs and be pushing information or activities or marketing opportunities down to the more local level. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that? How is it that Brand USA is more now domestically focused during the pandemic, sort of changing some of the, it sounds like changing some of the behaviors of the company?
So we're entirely focused on international travel. We were created in partnership with our federal government to grow travel as an export. The only way it's an export is when we bring people in from outside our borders. So that's been our focus we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary back on March 4th of last year. So now, while that's all been shut down, and then let's look at a state like Florida, where you and I live. Florida has, when I was running the state of Florida's tourism, I used to always have a great banter with my colleague in California, who had the most number of visitors and who had the largest tourism economy. But in either case, 90% of our visitation as a state of Florida comes from domestic markets, 10% comes from international markets, but that 10% probably generates 25% of the spend. So it's a higher spend return for the international visitors. In the cases of our DMOs, depending on where they are, those in New York and Florida and California, on the local level, they probably enjoy a significant amount of international travel. And then as you get to the more rural destinations, it's probably less of an impact, but all of them want to benefit from international travel as it comes across our borders and spreads around our country. In many cases, because they were just trying to literally keep their doors open, keep their people employed, they had to start making cuts, and international travel marketing was the first thing to cut, because that was, the lesser of the feed, the supply chain. So I can't tell you how many calls, how many emails I got when everybody realized this was not a short-term thing, it was going to be a long-term thing, to say Brand USA is going to be more important to us than it has ever been. we're having to shut our offices. We're having to abandon our international marketing. And we know we'll eventually get back to it, but we're going to be challenged to ramp back up, given resources, lack thereof. And so that's where our focus has gone insular, while we've not been able to promote internet outside the borders, in trying to do the best we can to be as an organization as well resourced to help lead recovery back to international travel and spend, and then do that on behalf of our industry partners, even brands in some cases, who are going to be looking for us to really leverage resources so that we can maybe turn 1 + 1 into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 down the road. So that's kind of, I guess, the evolution of our more insular look here recently.
Well, that's fascinating. That's an aspect of Brand USA and the nuts and bolts of the company that that the rest of us would never have known about. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, sir.
Laurie, I'm sure that Chipotle's interaction with your various outlets has changed a lot during this pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We're all company owned, which is great. We don't have franchise locations. Very unique in our industry for sure.
Really?
I did not know.
Most people don't realize that, right? So we have over 2,700 restaurants, and we own them all. So we're not a franchise model, even internationally. So the good news is we can communicate directly with not only our restaurants, but also all of our employees. So we have about 90,000 employees. And, throughout the year, it's been really critical that we can communicate directly with them, whether it be about health and safety, just what they need to know, but think about, voter rights and the social injustice that happened throughout the year as well. And now with vaccination. So right now, what we're doing, it's all volunteer, but we're encouraging them to get a vaccine. We're educating them. We want to open the avenues, make sure that anyone who wants to get vaccinated can get vaccinated. And so that's how we've been communicating. But transparency, a lot has changed, right? We haven't held in-person meetings. We used to have, we bring all of our general managers together. That was supposed to happen last March. We kept postponing it, like Chris said, thinking, this is going to be short term, right? And we even canceled this year, so it'll be a while before we bring, people together, but virtual, the way that we have changed from a communication standpoint. And we now hold, we just had last week, we hold webinars with, 2,000-3,000 people, and we can talk directly, with our employees, no matter where they are. And in the past, we didn't really do that. So again, another silver lining is being able to communicate. Our corporate offices, we have an office in Columbus, Ohio, and here in Newport Beach, California. And those offices have been closed since March 13th. So similar, we thought it would be a couple of weeks. People now have come and got their monitors and their chairs because they're realizing, we're staying home at least through this summer. And so that's been a change in the way that we communicate, and trying to make sure that we keep that culture that we work so hard to build, to keep that alive until we can get back into offices. But relying heavily on technology, webinar sessions, staying connected, being creative, staying relevant, both internally and externally, and a lot more communication, I think, over the last year than we've ever done before.
Yeah.
And Dean, I could just add to something that Laurie said that made me realize this. As we speak today, we're hosting on our Brand USA Global Marketplace, which is a digital, we haven't been able to go to trade shows like we would go all over the world all year long. So this is a digital simulated trade show environment. Today is a day for our suppliers, which are all the brands and destinations that represent the geographic and lifestyle experiences people can have. So it's a focus on the Mexican market. What does it look like now compared to what it looked like? What does the future look like? So we're doing some forecasting, and we're giving them a download of everything that we have, which is our primary research, our secondary research that we aggregate, so that they can be thinking about what does a return to the Mexican market look like, and how can they focus their individual businesses on it. Tomorrow is the second day of a 2-day event, and it is literally connecting buyers and suppliers. So all the travel trade in Mexico, whether it's tour operators, wholesalers, travel agents, are going to be sitting down face-to-face, one-on-one with all the suppliers of travel that are active in Mexico. So we're trying to simulate the trade shows that they have not been able to do for like the last year. And that's keeping everybody connected in a virtual way when they can't be doing it face-to-face. So that's similar to what Laurie was saying, is that we had to find alternative ways to keep people connected and otherwise informed.
Well, that's really impressive. It sounds exciting. I love going to Mexico, and I want to be part of that conference you just described. More importantly, thank you for taking time away from that to come and be with us today.
Yeah.
We are so grateful for that.
Yeah, no worries.
I can't see, we're hoping that folks who have questions for our two guests today would be willing to ask those questions via the chat line. Now, I can't see that very well. Dr. Fu, have you gotten any questions yet? I'm not sure I have not been sufficiently aggressive about asking for those questions.
Okay, so our audience, when you are watching our program, if you see there is a Q&A, if you would, please type your questions, and our panelist and moderator, we will take your question and we will have a mutual discussion. So this is a waiting time for people to type. At the same time, I would like to reflect on what Chris and Laurie said. That's fantastic what you have just mentioned, how to travel smart, travel safe, and also stay connected. I think this is what we are going to do for the next, not only 1 year, perhaps 2 or even 3 years, because we all will learn how to live with the virus before the virus is totally gone. And that will happen because I have never seen any everlasting virus, at least from the history. So that's good news. So my question, when we are waiting for the Q&A from our audience, I do have one question for each of you. Currently, our Department of Tourism, Hospitality, Event Management, we are developing and revising our certificates. That's a part of our curriculum development. So we are developing food and beverage management certificate. So we would like to integrate it with artificial intelligence and how to stay creativity and how to educate our students to really be creative, think outside the box. So now, Laurie, the question for you is for preparing the future leaders together as a partner. What would be your suggestions for our students in which area that you would like to see our students will be better equipped?
Yeah, good. I love that you said that, because I was going to put in a plug for the students listening in or who might watch the playback that, you know, we're hiring and we're growing. You know, that's unheard of, I think, right now in the restaurant industry, but we plan to open over 200 restaurants this year. And that means we need a lot of managers inside the restaurants. We need above restaurant management, you know, and a lot of people don't think of, we're in the fast casual business. A lot of think of it as quick serve. They might not think of that after, you know, graduating from University of Florida. And I would encourage them to think about that, because it is an incredible way to very quickly go from being a college student to running a multi-million-dollar business, managing, 20, 30, 40 employees. And we have great training, we have great benefits, and they can keep, rising and climbing in the organization. They can come work at the corporate office. And in terms of curriculum, when you mentioned your food and beverage certificates and that you're working on, I would also encourage individuals to think about areas of technology. You mentioned AI, but that's another area that we're growing and hiring is in our technology teams. And so you can't go wrong, because what better to pair maybe someone who's in operations, understands the industry, with leveraging technology for growth, right? You can't keep putting human resources against, growth and things that happen. You need to leverage technology. And so that's where we've seen the real win-win.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Chris, also similar to you, I know creating the branding across different destinations, that's part of your mission. So through our ongoing development for our certificate program, we are developing smart cities, attraction theme park. That's one of our new courses. And the other one is artificial intelligence and data analytics, revolution and application in tourism, hospitality, event management. Now connect to your company and what the needs across the globe. What kind of leadership styles, what kind of skills that you would like to see, and we will become great partners together.
Well, I'm a proud UF grad, so I'm looking forward to helping in any way I can. But DMO has been around a while, and the M in DMO always focused on the marketing side, but anymore, due to concerns of sustainability, due concerns of of actually the impacts of travel and tourism on communities, both the positive economic and diplomatic ones that we always focus on, but then the challenges to our community resource that have become issues over the past decade or so, have required our people to become destination managers and actually be part of the developing the fabric of a community, not just promoting it. So our DMO heads and our organizations are great resources for any of the students that are graduating or otherwise looking for careers, great resources, probably back in their hometowns and their home states to reach out to. So ours is mostly a marketing discipline, though technology even plays a big part of our days to days as they navigate and manage destinations. So I think we would have broad appeal as far as what our industry represents for any of your graduates. And technology is going to be, is as big a deal to us now and going to be even more so down the road. So your whole ideas of integrating AI and everything else into there can't be anything but a benefit.
Awesome, thank you. FYI, we also in the process of developing risk prevention and crisis management in hospitality tourism management. So in the past, we have been through some security safety, and then now we are, I would say, in the middle of health safety era. So I think they will be ongoing. They will become part of our DNA in the future when we enjoy the happiness with our family, friends. Definitely how to eat and play safely and smartly is part of our life. So we got one Q&A. Chris and Laurie mentioned the alternative ways to reconnect with consumers. Which specific ways will you adopt? What specific ways would you adopt? How do you manage the demand and the supply? Can AI be applied in a demand forecasting operation in the restaurant industry? So this is a 3-in-1 questions. So would you like to go first, Laurie?
A lot of questions there. So yes, I mean, I mentioned we are certainly leveraging, technology through our app and through delivery partners and curbside pickup. And if you think about all the, technology that you need to make sure you have all the pickup times correct and how many orders can you take. So technology is going to continue, I think, to fuel our business and allow us to grow. And how, I think the other question was, how will we adapt? What was the other about how we adapt consumers?
Yeah. Yes. How did you manage the demand and the supply? Can AI be applied in the demand forecasting and operation in the restaurant industry?
Yeah. And so the data piece of it, which, Chris mentioned as well, as you think about your students, data analytics are critical to helping us operate every day. You need to know, both looking back, what's historically has happened so that you can plan for that day, but also into the future. And so AI allows you to be able to quickly do that and put together algorithms and technology so that when you open the restaurant that day, you have a very good prediction of what you should be preparing. We only have 53 ingredients and we prepare them fresh every day in our restaurant. So it's critical that we get that right. We don't want to run out of guacamole, for example, which people love. Like that would be very disappointing. So we leverage technology to help us with that. And, certainly it's also been allow us to manage the volume of the digital business. We never thought we could sustain 70% of our business through digital. We have what we call a digital make line. It's our second line, the front line where you come into the restaurant and you might walk down and tell the employee what you want to order. In our kitchens, we also have a second digital make line, and that's just for digital orders. And so because we had that technology and all the process behind it, allowing us to do that digital orders, it's allowed us to handle this growth that we've seen here.
And in our case, we are direct to consumer and in 11 markets, taking our brand message straight to them. So where we're deploying that mostly on digital and social channels, we do it through partnerships that help us plan and then those that help us execute. And all of the, as we're trying to influence intent, again, being top of the funnel, and the response to that, AI has played a critical role in us getting more efficient and effective in doing that. And then through partnerships that we have with our brands and destinations, we're probably actively negotiating marketing in over 40 countries around the world. So all the resources that we have as an organization and that our partners have been critical to informing those marketing decisions as you try to navigate different cultures, different languages, and different levels of intent from our 80 million visitors a year that travel to the United States. So technology has already been and will be an increasingly important part of how we become more efficient and effective at what we do.
That's awesome. Thank you, Chris. We got one message from Miss Edith Hall-Friedheim. So Edith Hall-Friedheim is a giant in our area and also a very important key person that we have our first endowed tourism institute at the University of Florida, Eric Friedheim Tourism Institute. So this is a message from our beloved Miss Edith Friedheim. This is not a question, but a compliment to Chris and Laurie. Just when I began to think I knew it all, I gained a whole new perspective from both of you. Thank you, Edith. Love you. I could see your smile. So this is a very nice, wonderful message. Thank you again. And again, for our industry, for our higher education, as you know, we are in the business of preparing future leaders for you. And we, at this moment, I always share the visions, the missions with our faculty, staff, graduate students, undergraduate students. We want to show our hospitality all the time. So we want to even make people to feel our smiles behind the mask. And we want to really somehow help enhance the level of confidence for everything we do. So any comment on your increasing the hospitality connections through leadership development or any other things that you have been doing for your organization?
I think, it's something we've been focused on, hospitality, and it is challenged. You mentioned even just wearing a mask, right? You can't see someone smile, you can't feel that hospitality. So we've had to find other ways to make sure that, our employees are going above and beyond, because, we have our cornerstones of hospitality that we teach to every employee, and we continue to do that, through our training, but it is challenged. And also I will say that, customers are, sometimes on edge and a little bit more passionate these days than in the past. And so there's a lot more of that friction. So I think it's important that you continue to, focus on that training, make sure that, we say the guest is always right. But how do you handle challenging situations? We see things escalate in our restaurants between guests or between employees. And I think training employees on how to manage and de-escalate situations before they can become a bigger problem are just as important as that seeing that smile, maybe through their eyes. So critically important. I don't see that changing anytime.
Thank you, Laurie.
What I can say is that 9 years ago, when I was a brand new CEO at Brand USA, and Arnie Sorensen, the CEO of Marriott, was a brand new board member of ours. We only have 11, and Arnie was representing the lodging sector. He came up to me and he said, "So Chris, I look forward to understanding what a DMO is, first of all, and then how that would apply at the national level." And he said, "So I look forward to learning about that." He said, "But here's an opinion that I have right out of the gate." He said, "We can spend $100 or we can spend $100 million. If we don't let the world know they're welcome, then we're wasting our money." And I think you can apply that in this instance, and we focused on it. Much of what's complicating our worlds right now is out of our hands. It's tied to health and safety. So we can spend $100 or $100 million telling them to come back, but unless they think it's safe and that we can provide a healthy and safe environment, they're not going to come. So that's what Laurie has to do every day, delivering those experiences in her establishments, what our DMOs have to project as it relates to their ability to deliver their experiences within their cities around the country, and therefore how that manifests itself as an overall message to the world is a big part of it. And until we get that consumer confidence back, they're not going to travel. But as we also said, I do think there's a bunch of pent-up demand. So I don't think it's going to be quite as hard once things open up and get back to some semblance of a new normal. But it's still going to be a critical part of it, is trying to gain their confidence back.
Thank you, Chris. I will echo what Laurie and Chris mentioned again. We are going to continue to enhance our hospitality and our warm welcoming and integrate with technology. And also we stay with very clear touch and the close touch with humanity. That's how we build up the customer relations for long term, become friends, become family. That's how we make our business strive. Here's the last question. What did you think you knew when you started in this industry that turned out to be very different in the real world? Question mark. It's a big question.
That's a really
Or you
good
want to go
question.
first?
No.
Okay.
You know, it's funny. I started my very first job when I was 15 and a half and got my worker's permit. I worked at Baskin Robbins and I was an ice cream scooper and I loved it. I loved my job. And, you know, went on to college and had internships and, you know, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I kept coming back to the restaurant industry. And so I really enjoy the day-to-day, the craziness, but the hospitality piece and having that instant, you know, gratification and satisfaction you can provide someone, you know, around sharing a meal and just the different occasions that people experience. So, you know, I went to Miami of Ohio, a small school in Southern Ohio, and then went on to work for Stouffer's Restaurant Company at the time, and then Yum Brands, and then now at Chipotle. So I've always been in the food service industry and even worked, you know, as an employee, as an hourly employee. And so, gosh, what have I learned that, you know, surprised me? I guess I didn't realize how difficult it is from a corporate standpoint to manage down to the local level. You know, we can set, you know, all the policies and procedures, you know, and make everything as clear as can be from a corporate level, but you have to be able to make sure that it is executed flawlessly by a brand new employee like I was one time, 15 and a half years old, first job, not really knowing what I know, and, you know, food safety, how important it is, right? And so I think that I guess, you know, didn't think through how difficult it is just for the basic of procedures to make sure you escalate that through large chains who have thousands and thousands of restaurants. So.
And I would say, I also started out in restaurant business. I worked in a hot dog shop in a mall, and then I was a waiter in a downtown business hotel, at a business hotel. And I'd have to say that back when I was young and coming out of college and wondering what I was going to do for a living, I didn't even know these jobs existed, particularly a DMO job. I was like, Arnie, I don't even know what a DMO is. And here I've made 40-year career out of it. And so I think maybe to your students, just when you think you know exactly what you might be doing down the road, life has a way of pointing you in other directions. And I talk about this also. So I'm 63 years old. I'm in what I consider the twilight of my career. And I've been privileged to have great opportunities. And when you're managing resources, you have three resources. You have time, money, and people. Two of them are finite. And the third one is the hardest one to manage, which is the people. And it is always the case in no matter what business you're in, because we're all human and we're unpredictable and we don't always respond and cooperate like we should in a work environment. So I think the management of those resources is probably way underestimated in anybody's idea of what it takes to run a business. So even at 63, I'm still figuring out learning how to do that.
Good point.
Thank you so much. I think we all are students of life forever. So
Great.
Thank you so much, Laurie. Thank you so much, Chris, for your leadership, for your insights. Your stories are fantastic. Dean Reid, you are beyond fantastic. Thank you so much for your visionary leadership. Eric Friedenheim, our industry advisory board members, I know you're out there. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you all. And I hope you all enjoy our webinar as much as I have enjoyed. And I hope I will see you all again on March 1st again at 1 p.m. The program will be from Gainesville to the White House. Celebrations through event management, event planning. That's one of our former graduate right now. She is the event manager for the White House. So that is something we would like to bring to our industry. But again, you have been fantastic. I thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day and see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.